This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Hello and welcome back to the Moonlight Graham Show, and our Moonlighter for today is a guy that I've been wanting to get here on the podcast since I started this thing 5 years ago. His name is Larry Corrigan. Now, if the name Larry Corrigan doesn't ring a bell for you, let me give you a little bit of this guy's resume. Larry Corrigan played baseball at Iowa State. That's right. Back when Iowa State had a baseball team, Larry Corrigan was a two-time All-American for Iowa State in 1970 and 1971, where he led Iowa State both on the mound. He was an All-American pitcher and an All-American catcher. He led them in hitting, hit .353 in 1970 to lead the Cyclones to the College World Series, where Iowa State, that's right, they were at the College World Series. They no longer have a program. They were at the College World Series, and they got fifth in 1970, and Larry Corrigan was the best player on that team. After Iowa State, Larry was a fourth-round draft pick of the Los Angeles Dodgers. He spent 7 years in the minors with mostly the Dodgers, but then got traded to the Twins, never made it up to the big leagues. After his playing career, Larry came back to Iowa State, where he was an assistant and later the head coach. And he was the head coach and assistant while my dad and my uncle were there in the late 70s and early 80s. Larry's first year as the head baseball coach at Iowa State, they won a school record 34 games in 1981. Larry is an Iowa State Hall of Famer. But after his time at Iowa State, Larry went out to the West Coast and worked as an assistant coach for the legendary college baseball coach Augie Garrido. After spending some time at Cal State Fullerton with Augie Garrido, Larry got into pro ball, and this is really how he's known in the baseball community today. He started with the Oakland Athletics and then spent over 20 years with the Minnesota Twins as part of 2 World Series teams, a bunch of division titles. He was the guy who drafted Torrey Hunter, drafted Michael Kadire, drafted Joe Mauer. And so he is a legendary baseball scout. He's in the Baseball Scouts Hall of Fame. He also worked for the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Los Angeles Angels. And so this guy is a legend. If you look up Larry Corrigan on Twitter and scroll down a little bit, his retirement party from a couple years ago, it was a who's who of baseball that was there. The top baseball reporters there, the top baseball front office people from around the major leagues were all there. And Larry Corrigan is a legendary baseball guy behind closed doors. And so since he was my dad's college baseball coach, this is one of those guys that I grew up hearing stories about Larry Corrigan as like the greatest baseball man to ever live. So I brought my dad on the podcast to be my co-host for this episode because Larry, he's spent so much time in pro baseball that even though my dad and Larry and a lot of the old Iowa State guys have good relationships with Corrigan, you know, they don't talk all that often. So this was a really fun interview to do with my dad to get him caught up with the great Larry Corrigan and for me to give me a chance to interview him as well. So if you're a baseball fan, if you're an Iowa State baseball fan in particular, I think you're really, really going to enjoy this episode, but it is name drop galore. You're going to hear about, you know, Kirby Puckett and Joe Mauer and Torrey Hunter and a lot of those great Twins names from the past 30 and 40 years. So I think you guys are really going to enjoy this episode. I sure did. And if you like what we're doing here on the podcast, make sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever it is that you get your pods. And we would love it if you left us a 5-star review. It really helps. You can also follow the show on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We love hearing from you guys each and every week. But enjoy today's episode with Moonlighter, Larry Corrigan. So, Larry, I grew up obviously hearing stories about you at the dinner table, right? And so I would hear all these legends of Larry Corrigan at the dinner table, and my dad would probably censor most of it because I understand there was probably a lot of profanity in a lot of those stories. But you obviously are a legendary Cyclone, both coach and player. What do you remember about your playing days back at Iowa State?
I remember that I had a great time, and I remember I had some good teammates, and I remember that we won and that we went to the College World Series, and that Iowa State was absolutely the best place for me to go to college. So I fell into it, so that was a good thing.
Why was Iowa State the best place for you to go to college back then?
Just because of the people that I eventually met and my teammates and all those things and my friends. But it was a chance to play in the Big 8 conference against Nebraska and Colorado and Oklahoma, and holy cow. And the other place that was talking to me, Tim, was Illinois State University. And at that time, they were defending national champions in Division II. And what happened, I went down there and was getting recruited, and I went down there with a friend of mine, and the coach said, well, we don't have a dorm for you. We don't have a place. So he took me over to this lady's house upstairs. I had a room. He said, you can't smoke, you can't drink, you can't have visitors, you can't. And I said, holy cow. And then I went back home, and I called my mom and dad, and they stopped in Ames, and the rest is history. So, and because I went to Ames, I've had a good life. So I attribute a lot of it to Iowa State.
What was it like coming back to Iowa State as a coach after your playing career wrapped up? Because you were still pretty young at that point.
Yeah, I was still playing, and I just made a decision. The Minnesota Twins did not call me to the big leagues, and at that particular time, I was in AAA Toledo, and I don't think there was any question that I was the best pitcher on that staff. And they didn't call me up, and I got an opportunity to go to Iowa State. And I wanted to have a good program. I wanted to do good things.
Larry, I know you had a lot of respect for Cap Tim. Tell us a little bit about Cap Tim, your coach at Iowa State.
If you'd say something about the ball, he would explain how the ball was made. Everything that he did, he explained it over and over and over. And he was a teacher that just taught baseball down to the finest points at that time. So, and he was a distinguished gentleman, and he could be tough, but he wasn't tough very often.
A lot of those qualities that you're just talking about, Cap Tim, carried on to you too as well. And I remember the way we stood during the national anthem, the way we wore the uniforms, and the way we took care of the field, just the approach, the respect that you had for the game. But I do remember one incident, and hopefully you recall this. Do you remember when we played #1 Hawaii over in Hawaii, and it was my brother Danny's first career starting on the dish?
Yeah.
He got the yips. I don't want to go beyond that, but he got the yips. And what Danny had told me was, in our conversation before this call, was that he had lost his confidence. And he says, I remember our next road trip was like to Missouri or Oklahoma State or somewhere. And he said, you called him up to the front of the bus, and you said, Dan, you're our guy. You're going to be behind the plate for the rest of the year. He said he gained his confidence from that. It was Oklahoma State. He said in the first game he hit a dinger off of Oklahoma State. And he said he got rid of the yips. He got his confidence back. He says, I owe a lot to Larry just for that, just going up to the front of the bus and talking to Larry. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. I do remember that. The thing that's, and this is going to sound corny on this interview, but the thing was with you and your brother that I just thought there was so much potential. And they were good young men. So I always tried to help them as much as I could. And I think both of the Flattery boys needed encouragement on their ability, and they shouldn't have.
Well, this interview is not about me and Danny. It's about you, Larry.
Yeah, but that's the truth. That's the truth, you know. So, yeah.
You were a pitcher and a catcher. What did you like the best, which is very unique as a player today? What did you like best, pitching or catching?
Well, I'm going to answer that in another way. The same thing has happened in my life post-coaching at Iowa State. I've been in pro baseball as a scout and in player development. And people ask me all the time, what do you like better? And I always, well, the one that I'm doing right now, I like it the best. So that was the thing with me. I couldn't pitch every game in every series or every game in high school. So I would catch, and then I would pitch when it was my turn. So basically, I was a pitcher and a catcher. You know what I mean? Instead of a young kid that's a catcher and he happens to pitch every other weekend or something. So I grew up as a pitcher and a catcher, and I love both of them.
If you were scouting yourself as a player, how would you rate yourself as a player?
All right. I'm a 6'4" left-handed hitting catcher. And I would like to start off with the body was okay. It wasn't great. The athlete wasn't great. Now, I think I could hit. And I think I had power. I could really throw. My defense was probably below average. And I was maybe the worst runner in the history of the game of baseball. So those are my tools. But I think my makeup was positive. And my statistics to back it up were positive. And those are the things that you go through when you're a scout. So I think that's a fairly honest evaluation of my ability as a baseball player.
You know, Tim, I can back that too. Lemke and I were talking, Greg, of course, Hammer, and he said that you could step into the cage and just hit frozen ropes, just cold. And that was always amazed us, how you could hit like that, left-handed.
I was a left-handed hitter, and I used to hit the ball to left center field a lot. And people say, God, how'd you hit it over there? I don't know. I just hit it over there. And then all of a sudden, I was taught how to pull the ball. So now I've got the ability to maybe hit a ball a little further to the pull side, and I also go the other way. So honest to God, I'm not going to tell the fans out there that are all interested about my life, but I was a pretty advanced hitter in college. I did well hitting.
Larry, after your Iowa State coaching days, you moved on out to Cal State Fullerton and worked with Augie Garrido, one of the greatest college baseball coaches of all time. What'd you learn from him?
That I was a Midwestern guy that was raised with principles and theories, and your word meant a lot. And I think I got out there, and there were some things that were done that people wouldn't admit, but I think he was a little ruthless. And the thing that will shock you right now with, I don't think he had any interest in baseball. So I'm going to shock you with what the heck the impression of Augie Garrido. So that's it.
Is that what kind of got you into pro ball then? You're a Midwestern guy.
Yeah. And then I got an opportunity and that got to work, you know what I mean? So that's what happened. Augie would tell you things that he couldn't produce, and they were pretty much non-truths. One of the examples I'm talking to you about is moving expenses for my wife and me and my family and furniture and all that. And, athletic departments pay for moving expenses. Well, he promised me he'd do that, and then he never did. So I'm stuck with that bill. And he told me he's going to be a car program. And he never gave me a car program. So what he promised and what he did were kind of unethical is what they were. And that was the deal. And then I got into scouting after I left Fullerton. Mike Scoba, a guy with the Oakland Athletics, offered me a job, and everything since has been with pro baseball.
Yeah, and obviously you spent the large majority of your career with the Twins. And you're probably most famous for drafting Torrey Hunter, was one of your first main draft picks when you were the director of scouting for the Twins there. What did you see in Torrey Hunter?
Well, I'll tell you an interesting story about the Torrey Hunter deal. I saw him as a junior in high school, and I had him in my mind after I evaluated him, saw him, and he's this, and this. So the next year, our area guy and our Midwest supervisor liked Torrey Hunter. But I always said, God dang, he's a little pudgy. I don't know, he'll be all right. So I went down to see him play in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and he got off the bus and he looked like a Greek god. So that changed my mind. And he took infield on like a Colt field, and that was way too small for him because the fields were too small on a regular field for him because his arm was so strong. And one swing, he swung at a pitch up and hit a towering pop-up to the shortstop. And that's all that I had to go on. And I just went with the area guy and the cross-checker, and they said that Torrey will be the quickest high school player to get to the big leagues out of that draft. And so I said, okay, let's go. So we took him, and it took him about 6 years to get to the big leagues. But he got there, and he was good. And I'm proud of Torrey. He's a tremendous young man, and he's carried himself well forever. And I was part of signing him and drafting, and then I went into developing him. So I'm very proud of Torrey, and he has done a million things that I've asked him to do. And David, you know what that is. Go to the front of the line, and you'll be the first to go do this drill or show the other players how to do it. And he always did that. And I'm really fortunate to be associated with Torrey.
On that same note, Larry, how much involvement were you in the scouting and drafting of Joe Mauer?
I cross-checked him, but I was cross-checking. And Terry Ryan lived up in the Twin Cities, and Mike Radcliffe, the scouting director at the time, probably saw him 100 times from his freshman year on. So I went in and evaluated him. And I'll tell you one thing that was one of the things that Terry Ryan didn't say what his thoughts were at the time early, and neither did Mike. So they didn't want to give away their idea. But I know that I was the first guy in the Twins organization that said I thought he was better than Mark Pryor. I remember that, and I was proud of that, and I hung on that for my scouting confidence, you know. So yeah. I thought Joe was better than Pryor.
So Larry, as a scout, you know, it's awesome to talk about guys you were right on, like Joe Mauer, Torrey Hunter, LaTroy Hawkins, and the list goes on and on. And we've had a bunch of those guys actually on our podcast, and they all have great stories to tell about you because I always bring it up. But I got to imagine as a scout and someone in the front office, there are a bunch of guys you're wrong on as well. How hard is it for you to be wrong about a guy?
You're going to be wrong more than you're right, so it shouldn't kill you. With our group in Minnesota, we were together for quite a while, so we knew. Yeah, you remember when you said that, you know, Johnny Smith was the best player in the history of the world? Well, he never got out of A-ball, so you know, so you can't brag about who you liked and didn't like. I didn't like Dustin Pedroia. I didn't think Dustin Pedroia would play in the big leagues athletically and size-wise. And the guy that in our staff that liked him was right, and he ended up being an MVP of the major leagues. And the other one is Chuck Knobloch. I saw him out in Fresno one day and kind of got excited. And that happens to you. Your body, you feel it in your body and sensations. I told Terry, I just saw this kid Knobloch that I think is pretty good. And he says, well, I just saw him last week. Let me look at my notes. And he calls back, not too good. And then he said, I'll call Marty, the area scout for Texas. No, not too good. And so you doubt yourself. And then I just said what I said. And then he went out to the Cape that summer before his draft, and he won a home run hitting contest with Frank Thomas and Bo Vaughn and some other guys. And Terry saw him play, and, ooh, that kid's pretty good. So I'm kind of proud of Chuck Knobloch that I picked him out, and I'm kind of sad that I didn't pick Dustin Pedroia out. But when you see so many of them, David and Tim, you know, you're just grading them all, and you stay with the same principles. You know, when you just ask you about myself as a talent, I got a list that I go down on every player. And if you go down that list, you'll get an a right idea unless you're completely wrong on something that you think. You think the guy's got no power, and then 4 years later, all of a sudden he's hitting 30 home runs. You missed on the tool.
What's the hardest position to grade?
Most people would tell you catchers. And then if you were a position player, as a player, you're probably going to say pitching. And if you're a pitcher when you played, you're probably going to say catching and something else. You know what I mean? So to me, I kind of spent some time on that catching, and to me, it's like watching things in slow motion when they do things, but if you don't know what you're looking for, oh boy. And that happened when I became field coordinator with the Twins. And I'll give you an example. The thing that I knew the least about was fielding. And all of a sudden I had this guy come over and teach me what to do or what he's looking for or how he's doing it. And his son was a big leaguer. And he said, you see it? There it was. You see it? There it was. You see it? There it was. And nope. And then I learned what I was looking for. And now when I look at infielders, it looks like their feet are going in slow motion because I know what's kind of correct. And if they do something extra or take too many steps or go behind their feet, it's real easy once you know what it is. And then the makeup is a decider, and you just got to interpret what you think. He might be a dog, but you might be completely wrong. But you got to make an opinion of that makeup. And that may be one of the toughest things to do is figure out the makeup of a player. Joe Mauer's makeup, Torrey Hunter's makeup, LaTroy Hawkins' makeup, and Michael Dyer's makeup are through the roof. So those guys are all working for the Twins now. Guess what? This new version of the Twins, they hired the right human beings to come back and work for them. Somebody clued them in that LaTroy and Torrey and Michael were separating type makeup people. Mm-hmm. And I had all of them, and I'm very proud of them.
Do you ever pinch yourself? I mean, you're talking about Joe Mauer and Torrey Hunter, but you also played in the Dodgers organization in the 70s, right? In this legendary franchise. You've spent, 40 years in professional baseball, and you've probably gotten to know some of the most, the greatest baseball minds and greatest baseball players of all time. Do you ever pinch yourself and just think, what a crazy and interesting life I've led?
Well, I've lived a crazy and interesting life for sure. And I can't answer why that I've been so lucky, and it might be because of my mouth or something. But in the baseball business, I've been in rooms with Augie Garrido. I've been in rooms with Skip Bertman from LSU. And just because you're a coach, you can't get in that meeting room. You know what I mean? You can't get running with those people. And that's what happened is I've been blessed to be around the people in college baseball. And then now in pro ball, I've been doing it for 30 years and stuff, but I know everybody and I enjoy it. And that was what was so enjoyable about going to that All-Star game. And I was so close to that dugout. But, I'm in there and Terry Francona comes over and we sit down and have a talk. And, it just makes you think back, boy, I've been lucky to meet those people that you mentioned. I have been very blessed and real blessed.
Well, Larry, Lemke, my brother and I, Kerry Schrader, we've been very blessed to know you as well. And we've got some great memories. But I think one of your strengths, and actually Tim has this too, is your ability to network, to know people. And and Lemke told me to ask you you remember the Kansas game that didn't turn out well for us down there in Lawrence. And at night we went to a Royals game. It happened to be the first umpire strike in the history of Major League Baseball. And we rented a car, and I think you're driving. There's probably about 7 or 8 of us piled in that car, and we saw the Cleveland Indians play that night against the Royals. And I remember that night you introducing us to Bobby Bonds, and I thought, what a legend. And then when we go to Vero Beach, we went to Vero Beach, and you're introducing us to Sandy Koufax, Bob Welch, your roommate. El Campanis gave my brother a nut cup. Those are the kind of things that we treasure as players, but to know those people, that networking that you did, that had to help your career, whatever it was, and whether it was as a player, as a scout, and as a front office person. Wouldn't you agree with that as a profession?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's an innate habit or something, but David, when I would go to California, I would call the guy I knew, and if I went up to Washington, I always called people. So in terms of networking, I'm in contact with those people, So my phone just went dead, I think. You there?
Yep, we're still here.
Yeah, hang on, let me plug it in. So I continued to be in touch with people when I would go into a city, and I still do that. I've met some people that are amazing. You wouldn't believe who I've met that are good people. So that's a good thing about life.
So, Larry, you've been in the game for 50 years now, and a lot of people talk about the game changing a lot through the years, especially with technology and replay and all this other stuff. But as you watch the game, what do you think of the game today? Is it still the same old game to you, or do you see a different game on the field when you watch it?
Oh, yeah, it's a different game. It's a different baseball game, but the game is different. The office work, the scouting development. I think the game is going for the worse. And I'm not saying every guy that coaches in the minor leagues should be an ex-big leaguer or an ex-AAA guy. But I think he should have some knowledge of relating to being a player and how to react. And we're hiring people that are like junior college coaches, not at Kirkwood, not at, Boone, but some junior college you never heard of. But they're the guys that are doing that analytics, and that's what they're hiring. So they're hiring completely different people, and we're going to find out in a few years if they hired the people that can get the information out. And right now they got some things that are making people throw hard, but they got some things about guys not hitting too good. I was looking at an organization the other day and their whole team, and it wasn't just the starting 9, but it was the whole roster, that they had 2 guys that were hitting 200, and they had about 13 guys that were hitting less than 200. So that tells you something ain't going right. And it's tough to watch all the strikeouts.
Larry, you one of the things I always was impressed about you was the details. You chewed on me one time because I kept a lousy pitching chart, and Phil Chesnicka and Tim Riley they were just immaculate the way they kept their pitching charts. I remember you being very bright. Lemke wanted me to share this story with you. He said that you were an encyclopedia of sports trivia. You knew everybody, their hometowns, that type of thing. But he said you're only second to him. Was that true?
I think that's his opinion. I think that's that's truthful on his opinion, yes. Yeah, that's his opinion, and I think that's truthful. I'll tell you what about the trivia and all that stuff. I am deep into it, but that was me and my brother as kids. We did that. But now I do everything catalog in my brain where you're from. I'll never forget that you guys are from Fort Dodge and, stuff like that. So that's how I catalog stuff in my brain is where they're from. So I'll always ask somebody.
Where was Kerry Schrader from?
Eastern Iowa, for sure, over there.
Lost Nation.
Lost Nation. Lost Nation, and that's where Jim, whatchamacallit's from, the Major League pitcher with the Mets.
Oh, sure.
Jim McAndrew. Out of Lost Nation.
Right.
Jim McAndrew's out of Lost Nation, Iowa.
Lemke also said you were a legendary. Your use of the F word was legendary, and he said that. And I remember this, Larry. We were over in Nebraska, and we got hosed by the umpires, and you came into the bus, and I'm not going to. This is a family, but you said, "Well, the effing effers effed us again." He said, and this is Lemke saying he got an adjective, a noun, and a verb into a 7-word sentence, all with some form of it. Well, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I know that. I know that quote. Oh yeah. I do remember it. I remember it exactly. Yeah. I can tell you the whole quote again. Yeah. That's pretty good. Tell Lipke to stay in his own box.
Okay, I will.
That's a good deal.
The way we end every episode here of the Moonlight Graham Show is with the 5 big questions. So I got 5 more questions.
Okay.
That's okay.
Okay, fine. Yeah, we can do 25.
All right. Well, maybe we will. The first one is who's your all-time favorite teammate?
Cleo Smith.
Where'd you play?
Richmond, California. Second-round draft, 1972. Come in and congratulate you every day. He gave you a high five every second, and he was just positive as anybody you can be. And that's who he was. That's who come to my mind was Cleo. And God rest our soul, Cleo got murdered. So that's a little sad one. Who's the good guy? Bobby Welch and I were awful close. I'd go to Arizona and I'd go into games as a professional and in come walking Bobby Welch with me and what the heck's going on here? But he was a good guy. He always had golf clubs and golf balls and basketball and skates and hockey in his trunk, and that he'd always go do something. So I miss him.
Now, you've had quite the career, being a part of world championship organizations with the Twins and, just a long history in the game. But when you think back of your career in the game, what's one memory that you have that reminds you of everything that you love about baseball?
I think the enjoyment of who the people were and what kind of people they were as people, the Flattery brothers were the Flattery brothers. Torrey Hunter's Torrey Hunter. I think that's what I've got out of it. Terry Ryan's the most somber human being in front of the press and all of those guys. The funniest guy that ever lived. You know what I mean? So I thank the Lord that I got to meet Terry Ryan. I thank the Lord that I got to meet Michael Radcliffe with the Twins. So Mike Radcliffe out of Kansas City, when he's a scouting director with the Twins, knowing him is as good as knowing anybody I ever known. You know what I mean? That's better than Kirby Puckett. Kirby Puckett was a beautiful human being. He was everything that you people in the stands thought. Next his wall and my wall were the same walls in the old Metrodome. So I'm in there early in the morning with Kirby Puckett, and we're sitting there laughing and talking. David, that's a pretty good day in your life when you're, with Kirby Puckett, and who he is, but he's just Kirby Puckett to you. I knew him in junior college, and he knew me, and we've been acquaintances for 20 years. And I'd go into spring training when I was field coordinator, and I'd get there first. First guy to come in would be Puck. And we'd be in that clubhouse, me and Puckett, for an hour and a half before anybody else came in. So, I kind of knew those things were a big deal. I didn't take them as, that's nothing. Kirby Puckett's here and something else, And some of my friends, Rick Roden, they had a retirement down here, and he come all the way over from the other side of the state to be in the the banquet, and another guy flew in. You know, those things. I mean, they aren't all big leaguers. They're all good friends and obviously a part of my life.
On the flip side of that, baseball and sports in general is a game of losses, right? It's a game of failure a lot of times. What's that one loss or, one kind of failure in the game that kind of nags at you still to this day?
Well, this one don't hurt me bad today, but to give you an example of losses and wins, I pitched in A-ball Bakersfield. And the next year, I went to spring training, and I was hoping, God dang, I'd like to go to AAA. So I go to spring training, and I'm playing on the AAA team. And the start before the season opened, I threw a 2-hitter in the spring training game for 9 innings, which you never do. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna make this AAA team. And so now you're going to AA. So I went to AA and started opening night, and I had a perfect game for 6 innings, and we were up 6-0 when I come out of the game, and we lost. So that's the thing about losses, that wins are so hard to get in pro ball. If you're a 500 pitcher, you're not too bad. Now if you're 10-2, obviously you're real good. But a win is hard to get. I'll tell you one that was one of my greatest memories and experiences on the positive that ended up being a negative is I was playing in Anchorage, Alaska, and I was playing against the Fairbanks, Alaska team, and we're playing in the national championship game, and I proceed to hit a ball over the left fielder's head, and we win the world championship. And the guy that I got the hit off of is a legendary person named Dave Winfield. And the other guy that was catching the ball was Jim Sundberg of the Texas Rangers and the Royals. Well, that night, my uncle and me and Sonny and Winnie got on a plane, and we flew from Wichita to Moline, and then Sundberg lived in Galesburg, and Winfield lived in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I was the happiest guy in the world. Well, guess what? Those two guys played the big leagues a long time, and I didn't.
Now, you've mentioned a bunch of cool people that you've met. This podcast that I do is called the Moonlight Graham Show. Obviously, we've taken the name Moonlight Graham from the movie Field of Dreams, starring Kevin Costner. Have you ever met Kevin Costner?
No, but Augie Garrido was a buddy of his, but I never did meet him.
Well, that's too bad. You got to make that happen.
Yeah.
Final question from me here, Larry. What's the best advice you've ever received?
I'd say give it the best. Give it your best. That's all you can do. Scouting. How'd you do? I gave it my best effort. If you got a plan and you stay with it, do the best you can. If you're going to go to grade school, do the best you can. I was never allowed to be a knucklehead or a bum. My mom and dad kicked my butt and stuff, so I wasn't worrying about that kind of stuff. My mouth got me in trouble many times in my life, but just do the best you can. I'd tell you that tomorrow. You know what I mean? You're going to go out, and people always used to ask, when I was at Fullerton or at Iowa State, how do you get that job? Or how do you get that job? Or what do you got to do to get that job? And I always told the students or the athletes that you just do the best you can that day where you're at, and somebody will recognize it or somebody will see it. And I think that's what happened with me. Bill Kernan, I coached up in Alaska with. He saw me and he told Augie Garrido, and so somebody saw me or somebody saw how I did it. So attention to detail, yeah, David, I'm probably overhyped on that one, but it's important to me. If you see a guy doesn't care about details, you might be the wrong guy.
Your teaching skills, I was a pitcher, but I was a pretty good hitter too. You probably didn't know that, but I have 4 boys, and I coached them all in baseball, little league, up to probably their high school ages, and I used the same quotes like hips, hands. You always said hips, hands, and you made the game simple. That's what I liked about it. Even though it's a very complex game, you broke it down and made it simple. How to run the bases right, how to go back on a fly ball, how to come up throwing, and again, how to conduct yourself in the motels, how to conduct yourself in the dugout. Your mouth got in the way a couple times, and we saw that too. But in the end, we had a lot of respect for you, Larry. And the guys get together. I golf with Lemke, Crevaro, and Schrades last summer. We spent a goodly portion talking about you. But one of the memories Danny shared with me, you were a visionary guy too. I think it was in Hawaii as well. And we were up maybe on 5th, 6th floor of a motel, and you called him up to his room again, and he said, "Flat, see that yacht out there in the ocean? Someday that could be yours." That's the type of that's how you build our confidence and build the vision of the future of what we potentially could have been. And we appreciate that, Larry.
I got to close with this statement. It's going to sound like a brag statement, but it's one of the funniest things in the world. We were down in the instruction league one time, and we were in the third base of the Twins Major League spring training facility. And I was down there doing something, and this one Latin come up to me, and there were a couple of my buddy scouts and or my coaches and all this. This is going to sound like a brag story, but it's funny. But this Latin kid comes up, and he's just standing there, and he says, "How do you know everything?" And so all of a sudden that got brought up, and that got laughing, and that got around. So, how do you know everything? So that was kind of cute that the kid said that.
Are you aware that there's going to be a 50th, now 51st anniversary of the 1970 World Series? Are you coming to that, Ames?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good.
I'm coming to the Mendota Sweet Corn Festival in August, and I'm going to do that baseball thing, God willing, in the fall. And I just got back from Colorado, so I got a couple trips, and I'll stay down here, and then I'll go up there and enjoy myself. But I tell you, that College World Series team was awful good and fun that we had and memories. Sure. So, and I keep in touch with a lot of those guys.
We are also going to have a reunion of all baseball players that played at Iowa State that weekend as well. Yeah. So hopefully we'll see you then. And I know that there's a bunch of us that are planning on being at that football weekend as well. So I think
tell Lemke to take it easy, because I can go the other way on him too. If he starts bringing up stories, I can bring them up on him.
I'm sure you can.
Yeah.
Well, Larry, this has been a real treat. So I've heard these legends of you for so long, from my dad and my uncle and Greg Lemke. Just thank you so much for spending the time with us today. This has been a real treat for me, and I know it's been really special for my dad as well.
Okay. You guys take care.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you for listening to today's episode with Larry Corrigan. And I got to give a special shout out to Kevin Goodman. So Kevin Goodman, he's a fan of the show. He's a Moonlighter, and he's listened to a bunch of the episodes. And about 6 months ago, he was the one who said, "Hey, you got to get Larry Corrigan on the podcast," because Kevin was a left-handed pitcher for Iowa State back in the early 80s, right after my dad and uncle played. I think they might have overlapped for 1 year. And so played under Corrigan and is still pretty close with him today and in pretty constant communication. And so Kevin was the one that got me Larry's cell phone number and got me in contact with him to set up this interview. So Kevin, thank you for connecting me to Larry Corrigan. And it's always good to get connected to former Cyclone baseball players. My dad and my uncles, they played at Iowa State. I played at UNI. All those baseball programs have now been cut. So I feel like there's like this brethren of ex-baseball players that their programs no longer exist, and Kevin and I are in that group. So thank you to Kevin Goodman for setting me up. And, our quest for Cosner might have taken a big hit this week. I don't know how closely you guys were listening to this episode, but it sounds like Larry Corrigan and Augie Garrido are not the best of friends. And Cosner and Garrido are actually pretty good friends, I think. And I was actually coming into my interview with Corrigan thinking Corrigan might be one of the guys to get me to Cosner because he knows Augie Garrido. Because Cosner in the movie For Love of the Game is such good buddies with Augie Garrido that he had asked Augie Garrido to be the manager for the Yankees, the opposing team in For Love of the Game. So if you watch that movie closely, you notice Augie Garrido is in the movie. He's the Yankees skipper in For Love of the Game. So my thought coming into this interview was, oh, Corrigan's probably going to be able to get me in touch with Cosner because they've probably met through Garrido, but it doesn't sound like that's a relationship that we want to go back after. So might hit a little bit of a road bump if Cosner's people are looking at or listening to the podcast this week and they hear that Augie Garrido story. So I don't know. Cross your fingers. Need some prayers out of you guys out there. But thank you for listening to the pod this week and also last week. Man, the Dallas Clark episode last week with Dallas Clark and Greg Lemke, that was a really, really big episode for us. So I think it goes to show you bring the Cyclones and you bring the Hawkeyes in the same room and you duke it out a little bit, but you bring those good conversational people like Dallas and Greg together. That's kind of what our audience was looking for. So thanks for listening to that. A lot of great feedback on that episode. So thank you guys for following the show. It really means a lot to us, the feedback that we get all the time. A lot of great Moonlighters out there. So special thanks to the Moonlight Graham Show team, the trusted co-host Tom Griffin and I. We just did an episode with upcoming episode with Reed Sinnott, who's coming back to the pod. Yesterday, Tommy was great on that episode. And special thanks to Andy and Neil, my brothers, who helped me out booking these daily episodes. So special thanks to those guys. To our producer, Brian Samvik, who does all the back-end work. Brian Samvik is the best in the business. And talk about best in the business, the best podcast art guy in the entire podcasting world is Brendan Gargano, my friend Brendan. So Brendan Gargano, thank you for doing all the artwork. And thank you guys for listening. Have a great week, Moonlighters.
It's Moonlight Graham, yeah. It's a pretty good program, broadcasting to the heartland. Sports stories for the everyman. It's Moonlight Graham, yeah. Please follow us on Instagram. You're loving us on Twitter too. You download every pod we do. It's Moonlight Graham.